My name is Adrienne Wells. I'm the corresponding secretary for the Stage Managers Association, and I'll be your online moderator today. A couple of things to keep in mind. If you have a question, you can either chat them if you're at your computer into the group chat here in Zoom. Take a peek at that. It's at the bottom of your window if anybody wants to check it out. You can also have a little running commentary if you'd like, and as things come up, I'll pipe them out if there's a moment to share them that's appropriate within the class. For those of you who might be on the phone with us today, you can hit *9 and raise your hand, and I will call on you if you have a question. You can also raise your hand if you are on your computer. That's also a viable way to ask a question if you want to ask it in person instead of via chat. Either is welcome. Some folks are happy on camera, some folks are not. In fact, I will disappear from the camera and you will see a fancy dancy SMA logo here in just a moment. With that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Erin Joy Swank, who's going to be presenting today.
Hello, friends. Welcome to a Stage Managers Association members only webinar, meeting, discussion, all of those things, whatever you want to call it. I have experience in musical theater is my big baby. That's what I do the most of and enjoy the most. But I also do opera. I've done some dance. I've done Nutcracker to music, all sorts of stuff. And so I had recently presented a lot of this for a college. And so I adapted a little bit for our members and we'll see how we do. Working on trying to advance the next slide. There we go. So you've got me, you've got Adrienne on the back end, like she mentioned. And as we said, this is being recorded to distribute later. So the biggest question is, okay, but do I have to read music to call a musical especially? I do think for opera, you need to read music because of various reasons. And in fact, there's another whole webinar discussion we had about opera. So I would refer to that one of the why so much music matters for opera. But in a musical, it is certainly helpful if you can read music. But we're going to start off with, okay, so what if you can't read music or you just don't want to flip through all the pages? What are some of the ways that you can set up your score, your script, instead of using a musical score? So first off, if you're doing a dance number, you could totally go off of a stopwatch. This is for a ballet sequence that I did. So the cues are on the left with standbys sort of slightly over some. And as long as you start your stopwatch exactly at the same time the track is, you can have some close things that you know that you don't do anything until 3 minutes into the piece. That said, you never know if you're going to be exactly on the same second. So give yourself either some words of the music right around it or, you know, some beat counts. So like between the two buttons, that it's a standing, I count 6. That made sense when I was doing the show back then. Applause peak. And then down here, I think you can all see my cursor moving around. But so the trumpets gliss down, 8 counts, and then go just before the high note. So whatever notes you need for yourself to say, okay, this is how I'm calling it. I have to wait. I can wait for a while. I wait for some visuals to happen. I'm sort of watching my stopwatch. But as we said, it's really hard to know if you're exactly right. If you're lucky enough that it is tracked music and you can see the counter of the track alongside, then you can be even closer to calling it on the right time. But I don't necessarily, it's used a lot in ballet. This kind of a format, or everything's based on visuals, whatever you need to do. Make whatever notes you do you, is what you'll probably hear me say several times. Do what works for you. I'm just trying to give you several options. However, more so if you want to be a bit more exact calling off of it. So maybe you can't read music, but I bet you can count because we're all stage managers. So I toured with the Rockettes for 5 Christmases. And this is a page from their very famous Wooden Soldiers. So all the girls go in and out, and we had moving lights to every single movement that they did. There was no words during all of this particular number. So we just had a whole bunch of 8 counts. Occasionally it would be 7 or 4 because the music would slightly change. But you can call on an exact beat, following along. You can call on the and of a beat. There's a 7 and 8, so it lands on the 8. And you can and then you can give yourself whatever markers you want. So this was the diamond step that the girls did. Here's where a ratchet sound happened in the track. So whatever you need to help yourself marking, but We could have found the music and called off the music, but this is so you don't have to turn all those pages of music and you don't have to read music, but you can count to 8. And so you can keep following along. And you can be as exact as possible, whether it is on the downbeat or on the and right before it. You can also handwrite in similar things into the middle of a, this is from Big River. So all of a sudden there's a musical interlude of 4/8 right here. So in the middle of everything, just scribbled out. I wrote myself a note to count it slower, and a heads up that the 3rd eighth was the scoop step to make sure I was following around the right number of 8s. But then I could call it directly on count 8 of the 4th 8 for lights 55. So this is the quick and dirty. Write it in your script. Do whatever you want. If you have more time and you want to be spiffier, you can take it and you can just type it out. Same thing. This one count set of 8 starts when the women enter. And when Jeanette enters on the 2nd sound of 8, all that kind of stuff. And if you had any cues, you could write it anywhere in that. And then I did go straight to music because this was like an interlude that we added ourselves and didn't have any music for. But then we went to score number 2 in the morning for the next page. So that was a way how to write that. You can do a combination of words and music. So here's one set of a big dance break. I gave myself some markers, like there was a lick, a musical lick of the musicians, happened at 8, also happened at 15. That's when I could get ready to call the bump on the and before. Technically it would be another downbeat, but we'll just call it 9 for our purposes because nobody else is following along besides us. I think those are pretty self-explanatory. Here's more from the Rockettes, combining lyrics and music. I had actually gotten this from somebody else, and then we realized there actually was a 4th count, not a 3rd. So that's why this is different. But you could listen for the honks of the sound cue down here. You could call it just before the 8 here. Again, another combination of combining lyrics with music. Sort of combining both the original stopwatch and following the audio track that we were talking about, along with dance counts. So here's one I did. It was all tracked music, and I'm a big fan of good starting place. Wherever is a good thing that we all know where we are and it's a good place to pick up in rehearsal. I write a GSP, good starting place, in almost every show I do, including just plays. If it's a part where we know that everybody's not mid walking around the show or anything like that, I'll write a GSP in my script. So 147 was a good place in the track to pick up. And then there was this musical break of the violin with the singers up left. And then I could anticipate right before the high note of right after the 5th count of 8, as well as something on count 8. So I split these 2 up. You don't have to keep 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, 7, 8 all on the same line. It's probably very tiny in your screens right now, but that's what this is. It says anticipate the high held note, 2, 3, 4, second line, 5, 6, 7, and the geo is on 8 there. I've also got some visuals I did in and out, but then if we needed to start again at a different spot, 3 minutes into this track was another place that was good to start before they started saying, oh, the roof is sounding from the hooves a pounding. This was a Christmas holiday show. And I think I have one more of this kind of version. So again, all I needed was just the opening numbers. So there was a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you would hear these sing, 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 sing in the background. So sing started, and on count 6 of sing, I had another cue. And then I just gave myself some markers. At 21 seconds in, the Oompa Loompa theme sounded a lot like Willy Wonka came in. They said sing, sing, sing again at 34, but I was watching to see what he was doing visually, but I didn't really have to call anything other than the standby until 2 minutes, and I think that's 9 seconds. It's even small on my screen right now to do that. So I'm going to start there and see if there's any questions. Adrienne, do we have anything?
At this time we don't, though, folks. This is a great opportunity to remind folks who might be on the phone, if you're following along, that *9 is the way to raise your hand.
You caught me. I thought you were going to talk a little bit longer. Drink break.
And for those that have just joined us, welcome. Feel free to raise your hand or add your questions or thoughts about this into the group chat box. We are open for discussion here. So we'll have these periodic breaks as Erin takes a sip of water and then moves on to a different segment.
Okay, so if you can read music, sure, go ahead and add it in. But like I said before, sometimes it can be a lot of pages to turn. And so if you've got dialogue, if you've got libretto, that doesn't matter as much for the cues. I tend to, during tech, have my vocal score right there with me and already printed off and stuff. And so if I need to hurry and grab a page and write the cues in there and deal with it later. But I like to do a Frankenscript or Frankenscore, depending on the need or how much it's more of a score, more of a script. But this is nonsense if anybody recognizes the lyrics. So I didn't have anything for Tackle That Temptation with a time step, but then we went into a dance break. So I typed out the words so I didn't have to be, because this would have been probably another whole page just with those 4 lines of text. I didn't need them, or I could have just called on the word step if that was appropriate. But then the last Tackle That Temptation with a time step before temptation tackles you, I wanted to know the music already, so I could call it on the word you, which is what this yellow line is right here. And then we had what we called the different sections of the musical. So it sounded like West Side Story at first, and that's what everybody called it during rehearsal. So this was where West Side Story was. This was the travel through. This was the second 8. This is the third 8. So I could make sure I was still following along. Blue, and I put a little key in the front of my script in case anybody else needs to follow along. But blue is sort of more for me. It is the blocking that I'm following. It's helping me count 2 8s or 3 8s. And then the yellow was the definite cues for me. You
Question
can also,
for you on that page, Erin.
Yes. Yep.
Is this a combined scan of the piano vocal as well as the lyrics at the top, or where did you
Yes.
pull this music from?
Yes, and I had a PDF of the vocal score, so I was able to just take a snapshot in Adobe. I have Adobe Acrobat paid, but even in Reader, you can take a snapshot of an image, basically, of any section of a PDF. And so I'm a big fan of going ahead and setting up a Word document with, this particular time I had the cues right in it, but a lot of times I'll have the cues on one side. So I will go ahead and set up my margins in Word exactly how I want them, so I have enough room to write out all my scripts, my cues. And then I can either hand type out the libretto if I don't have that also in a document, and I can copy and paste in my image from Adobe Acrobat. You can also do the plain old, the way we used to do it, truly cut and paste. And so you can piece together your score either with taping the music in or taping or doing it and putting it on a photocopier so you have a clean script. But I'm a big fan of using plain old Adobe. If you can, I had an educator discount, and so I was able to buy the full version. It was one of the best purchases I had made because you can clean up those terrible black lines from the copier that somebody has given you, change the margins to what you want, but you can also go individually and just on the free version of Adobe Acrobat, take a little snip, it's called edit snapshot, or take a create snapshot, and then copy and paste that into anything.
So Liv is asking, is Adobe Acrobat how you build these in general? Is that your go-to? You also mentioned Word? What's your...
I usually build them in Word. I will mainly go with whatever script they give me, depending on how great the quality is, because we all know we get perfectly ready for stage manager scripts all the time. But it depends on the quality of it and how much I can edit it in Adobe. I do use Acrobat if it's already in a PDF form and it's already fairly decent, or I can edit it pretty easily. And then you can put text boxes and comments and things like that over it. But my go-to is pretty much Word. And then if I'm calling digitally, I will then save it as a PDF. And then the Adobe paid version, you can edit and release pages and extract pages and all sorts of fun things like that. And certainly get rid of any of those extra silly marks that are there, including like somebody's name that was on the binding of the edge of every page. You can get rid of that. And you can adjust the margins pretty easily in Adobe as well. Any other questions or comments?
Mac tip, Command-Shift-4 allows you to grab a portion of a page and paste it into Word.
So on Mac, Command-Shift-4. Thank you. That was from Nikki. All right. You can also do it for just a couple measures. If that's all you needed, you just need to be able to call it, you know, right on this so it lands before the this top note before it lands on the whole note at the end, if you do read music. So I love just, and I've also been known to literally just cut that out of it and tape it right into my score until I have better time. Or sometimes if my run's short enough, that's just how it stays the whole time. You can also use this for things you don't have music for, or like they give you a sound cue that is very musical. I will hand write in my notes so I can still call it on the top note before it goes to the low note. If you can read music, you don't have to have the music for everything, or do your beat counts or anything like that. I'm just trying to show you a whole bunch of different versions of the same theme. Okay, anything else on the combo script, the Franken script? Alrighty, moving on. So during rehearsal, might as well use this time to, if you are working on a musical. Like I said, I love to do a GSP, good starting place. What do they call the sections? Like the West Side Story, the floaty arms, the dying swan, all of those things, as much as you can put them into your 8 counts of your dancer 8 counts, or into your music, any of that kind of stuff. Definitely keep note of all of the claps and stomps that are in the show, because you might have music that goes bump bump right with their stomps. And certainly tempo changes, because those are some of the biggest places where you're going to have a change in mood. So it goes from a floaty feeling to a more intense feeling, or the opposite. And then of course big, if it's a dance break or whatever, any big shifts of movement, you're probably going to have focus area lighting to change for that. So those are all the things for you as a stage manager to look for. Anybody else have other tips they can think of to watch for during rehearsal? Because this doesn't have to be all of my great ideas. In a moment, I'm going to move on to when you're calling them. Yeah, since we're stage managers, what, are they sitting on steps, or are they sitting on a platform edge? So in rehearsal as a stage manager, go ahead and have a rehearsal block ready to go, or a chair that you can pull up and down. Part of calling to music is how can you help the choreographer best. Yeah, all right, moving on. When you're calling, if you can see the conductor, that is your best friend. You know how we always call in anticipation for when this board op is going to take the cue? So you don't call it on the downbeat, you want them to hit the button on the downbeat. And it's always a game during tech to figure out what their reaction time is and all that kind of stuff. But if you have the conductor and you can either see them from a straight shot because you're calling from a booth, or if you, even better, can have Maestro Vision or conductor cam, any of those kind of terms, especially like an infrared one. So when it goes to blackout, you can still see them, though there's probably still a light on them because the orchestra members want to see them too, or her. But you are conducting the show and you're trying to match with their conducting. So literally, if you can watch them do the upbeat with your hand, when it goes down is when they're all going to go. So if you can call it on their upbeat, your board op's going to hit the board, the button, on the same note that they are. So if you would all have a chance, because it's live theater, as we all know, or live opera or live dance. And so they may change how long they're going to hold it versus applause. And we always often forget to tech the applause parts during tech. So it could be longer, it could be shorter. And so this way, if you have a visual on the conductor at all, it'll help you out so much better. You'll often, and then at the end of the music, you'll probably want to call it on count 8 or the 8 and, depending on how fast your music is. And then you'll probably have a lot of button cues. So the da-dun-da-dun-dun-dun-bum. And so either you need to kind of understand you need to know what your lighting cue does. Does it go brighter at the end, or does it dump? Because that may change whether you call it on the button, before the button, all that kind of stuff. So make sure you're talking very well with your lighting designer and the director of what the goal is for that number. And tempos may change during a production. So don't be married to that it has to be on 8 if you know that it's for the button. So you might add that in, that it's a button cue, because if all of a sudden it's going really slow, may have to squidge it and change it slightly to go. That's why we're there. That's why hopefully our jobs don't go away, is because we've been there all along. We're breathing with the production at the same time. So calling can be with a cutoff. It might be a lot of times a good cue either from the conductor. A lot of times singers will get a breath cue and hear them go, it's the same kind of this kind of thing. But if you have a cue that is instead of off the conductor, but maybe the singer does something a cappella, or they start it and then the conductor follows, sometimes watching their breath, and hopefully you have a good enough visual that you can see that, is the same as that conductor raising their hands, but oftentimes you can call it right off of their breath before they're about to sing. I will put little notes. All of these things that I have on this page are for notes that I might put in addition to, you know, right at the downbeat, but I might say with the cutoff. So it's not necessarily count 8. If they decide to hold it off to a 10 count, go with the cutoff rather than count 8 with the breath for the next downbeat. And then a big musical sign, I love to put in these 2 slashes, railroad tracks, because that's usually where a pause is in the music, a breath, a pause, anything like that. And
we have a couple of questions about, couple of questions. Those poor musically connected people. First one is how do you record these in your book in order to transfer to another person? Should somebody else need to take over?
I'm about to show you several music versions, but in fact, I'm pretty sure cutoff is in there. But in parentheses or in brackets, you figure out what is your coding. Is it words that are in italic? That's the notes to the next stage manager or to yourself. Is it words in brackets? It's kind of also, are you doing it in pencil or are you typing? Could change a little bit. Some of my stuff for myself is in blue. If I'm doing a digital script, blue is notes to myself, like keep an eye on the fog, and that, you know, check that the fight is going well. You're looking for this. Any of the notes that you would put about anything, and especially if you're a younger stage manager or someone with less experience, you know how the show goes, but as much as you can help out the next caller, if there is one, but also yourself on that day that just things that just aren't feeling right, and you're like, there's a Q2Q comic that is about hey Adrienne, I'm getting a message, can you help Ruth E. Kramer get in, please? She can't find the link. So I'm sorry, where was I?
If you can take a peek at the chat, there's a couple more questions.
Okay, great. So I think that answered the first one. Let me go back up, scrolling. Have you had times where you don't have conductor vision, have had to guess the feeling from when they were going to take it? Yes, I have. It's always a fun game. When at all possible, try to get that conductor cam or try to see if you can, angle your way over. But if there's certain ones that you have trouble with, talk to the conductor. Actually, one of my favorite things about I know it's back to not answering your question quite, but if you do have a camera and there's a section that you're just lost on, a lot of times you can just say, hey, can you give me a heads up in the camera? And most of the time they'll do it with the biggest smile possible. And if you're like, I just get lost right here, and they could be like 1, 2, and if you're on 4, 3, you ready? And 4, and they'll even cue you if you want. A lot of times it gives them one of their biggest giggles of the day too for the conductor. Otherwise, you're hoping, especially a lot of times it's more, it's usually the beginning and the ending of the songs that are different, or cutting into some dialogue in between that's the hardest. And hopefully you and the conductor have just been with the show together enough that you're breathing together and knowing the show and guessing what they're going to do, and you're listening for that applause. And so many cues will be called on the peak of the applause for a musical. When you're going into the next, whether it's into the next scene or into the next song. And so if it's on music, then you're hoping that you and the conductor figure out the same timing to do, okay, that was the peak of the applause. And sometimes it depends on the show. Sometimes it can take a show or two. That's why hopefully you have previews to try to get some of those in. I do try to get, especially during tech, if I have somebody near me, I can be like, I need you to applaud in this scene because I know that the actors aren't taking their time like will be, or I need time to spit out another cue. So I will put a shill, you know, whether it's the director or the lighting designer or an ASM who's able to watch from the front of the house because we have extra people backstage. That's always my favorite. It's like, please, somebody applaud during this next transition. And they're like, okay, because we all get tired during tech. But yes, and then to clarify, let's see, don't, how do you call, yep, did that one. Oh yeah, so when I said on the and of a beat, so if you are, I love using these things that always travel with me, my fingers, because so much music is in 4s and 8s. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I can do things. And if you don't know music at all, basically you can also do 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. So you could call on the and, which is between your 7 and your 8 fingers, if you need it to land on 8. You can even get into so those are 8th notes if they're the ands, because a quarter note is really 1 note, and we're not going to get into true music theory in this one and how to read music. There are other things that can teach you that better than me. I do have a little bit of an example in a moment. But 8th notes, and you can even split them up even more into 16th notes, and all of a sudden you start hearing 1 eanda, 2 eandas. But that's all musical theory. But you can call on any of those to be very specific and still not have to call off music. If you can follow music and you can call it on that little run of notes, then you can pick exactly which note to call it on. But yeah, if you break it up into ands or andas, and you'll also probably be hearing the choreographer count it that way, or the musical director count it that way. So listen to how they divide up the music. Let's see. Tara says, for a musical I was calling, the conductor let the drummer take cues on his own. I tried watching the drummer, but he was very unpredictable with timing and didn't always make the same motions before hitting the cymbals. How do you suggest calling in this scenario? Pray? No. Yes, it can be interesting, and sometimes you just have to go for it and hope you get it. And it could often be if it's very, very unpredictable and you have a good board op. I'm a fan of taking me out of being the middleman. If you're like, as soon as the drummer goes, go. If it's a really, really difficult one and you've learned that it's inconsistent, but otherwise, do your best. It's the whole breathing with it and hoping that you can figure out what they're going to do. If you already know in tech that it's a little inconsistent, you might talk with the lighting designer and to see, you know, what suggestions they have, or how much can they, instead of being a 1 count cue, can they make it a 2 count so it's not quite so obvious if you don't line up exactly with the drummer, that kind of stuff. That's about the best suggestions. Does anybody else have suggestions on calling cues to inconsistencies?
This is Claudia. I have.
Hi, Claudia. Go for it.
Hi. I'm gonna just clarify a little in that there's always going to be inconsistencies when you're working with human beings, right? But a drummer, for instance, is usually one of the most consistent people. So if you were working with an actor and they didn't do something consistently and you needed to work with them to call something, you would work with them. You would bring them in on the conversation. Hey, colleague, this is what I need to be with you on this. So we need to come up with something consistent. And you would work that out and you would make the plan. For a drummer, I don't think you can say that they get to just be inconsistent and that you have to deal with it. I think you have a conversation with them. You come up with something between the two of you that makes it work, because that is what the show needs, right? So the stage manager shouldn't have to ever think that your job is to make it work without talking to the person on the other end. The person on the other end also should be part of that conversation and realize that in order for you to do the job, that you have to come to an agreement. And for a drummer specifically, in theory, you might have a more of an option for consistency once you talk to them about it, because in order to be a drummer, you have to be able to keep time and be consistent.
Agreed. Everything she said. Yeah. We did have a show where we kept having a sub drummer, and it was very hard to get. Even the musical director and the actors and everybody were not real happy with this drummer, but that was the choice we had given the schedule. And so it was one of those that the musical director would talk to the drummer as much as she could. The actors would talk to the musical director about the drummer, and we'd get to certain sections and I'd be like, okay, let's see what our tempo is today. So everybody was just ready on headset, and we'd see if I was calling faster or slower, knowing that it wouldn't be on the same beat. That was a given that we knew there was only so much we could do. Yes, Claudia, everything Claudia said about how much can you keep it consistent, but we knew when we had this sub drummer in who had only seen the show so many times that it was going to be an adventure. And so you just go, all right, let's put on our best attitudes and see how this is going to go.
This is Ellen Marie. I just had one thing to add to that.
Sure.
I think you can also trust your crew sometimes. If you have a very, very short turnaround and the crew's been doing the show for a really long time and you're the new stage manager coming in. I once got an entire crew on my team when they realized I was going to follow them to a certain extent because I was calling. I had pyrotechnics cues I had to do. I was flicking switches. I was calling light cues, and I just couldn't get the damn tree to grow in the right place. So I walked over to the
oh, Nutcracker,
I
perhaps.
said, hey, John, here's the deal. I'm going to flick my switches and I'm going to bang on this guy's back because that's what I have to do for safety purposes. And I'm going to try to flick these switches, but please pull it at the right time so the lighting director can get his cues. I'll follow along and eventually I'll get it. And there was so much respect there because they realized that I knew I was human. I wasn't going to be perfect the first time, but they'd been doing it for 10 years. So they taught me in effect, and I got asked back there after that.
And that's another thing. If you are taking over a show, I've taken over shows where you're like, that's not where that cue goes. That's not where it's landing. And if you talk to the crew and you're new and you can realize, you're like, so what is the count on that cue? Or what, and so they can go, oh yeah, we never take it when the stage manager calls it. It's like, oh, well, help me figure out where should I call it? So you'll gain much more respect and they may actually start taking it on your cue then. But yeah, I've had that happen, both the stage manager above me when I was an assistant and then I took over from her, but also it made for a good being able to train in new stage managers because they would take the cues where they were supposed to go. They just wanted you to keep getting better and better so they didn't have to absolutely take it on their own. Because you still really do want one person make it, especially for safety, as much as you can have just one person calling the cues. But use the safety factors. And I've certainly had board ops where, the actor jumps ahead of line and they take the cue and they go, sorry. And I'm like, nope, that's what needed to happen because all of a sudden they turn down stage, which is when there's supposed to be a different light on them. So it's a give and take. That's why I said before also, I liked to take me out of the middleman at times, if it's appropriate. Certainly this isn't about calling the music, but light switch cues or setting the needle down on a record and making the sound go. As much as I can give them all of the heads up and say, stand by for sound cue X on your own, they'll know, and you've already talked through what it is, or you continue to say it in the standby, for the record. Take me out of being the middleman and get that cue as tight as you can. So anything else about this part? Okay. So, but what about the actual music? I have a video that I have, actually, wait, I'm looking ahead my next slide. So, you're going to watch for landmarks in the music. If you cannot read music, there's still some of music that I bet you can read. Can you do an opera? Maybe not. But there's some things to watch for in landmarks. So this is a little bit outside the box, but this is my favorite you think you can't read music. Perhaps you can. I'm going to butcher how you say this, but it's La Orgue de Barbarie. A barber's organ, I think is what it stands for, but I could be totally butchering that too. But it's this older form of an instrument. And this is my favorite. And I think that you'll be able to hear, we did a test, so you should be able to hear both my voice over it and not. So this is sort of like an old piano player roll works and that kind of stuff. There are holes in the paper. And then every time that hits where this big bar is. So this works the opposite of regular music because you're reading to the left instead of reading to the right. But start looking at the paper when they do the close-ups and see if you can figure out what's going to happen next. I know, well, he's going to get there. He's going to get to us. Also, if you can read music and all that, come on, it's Smooth Criminal on this kind of an organ, so that's different. I take no credit in making this. Here's the guy's username, PAAPAT. So these are the low notes down here. These are the high notes up here. See this part right here coming up? This like gliss up? That's gonna happen here in just a minute.
Hey, Erin,
yep.
What are you looking at when you say right here?
Are you seeing my cursor move around?
No.
Oh, is anybody, because when we practiced this, Adrienne could see my cursor moving up.
No, nor are we actually hearing the music.
You're not. Shoot, this worked in our test.
I'm hearing music.
Bummer.
I was able to hear the
can
music.
hear
I
the
cannot see
music.
your cursor. The music's super quiet, but it can be heard.
Okay, and I don't have a way. So we're gonna make this link available and you guys can hear it afterwards. We're about a minute into a 4-minute exercise. So I've paused it right now. So as you're watching it later, if you can't hear the music now, and I will try to be a little bit quieter because I know that was one of the issues we had. But watch for the landmarks. So if it goes up, then the music's probably going to go up. There's a couple times it's not quite as obvious. If all of a sudden the music gets, the dots get very spread out, what do you think is going to happen then? If all of a sudden they get crazy, what do you think is going to happen then? You're reading to the left instead of to the right like music, but I'm going to try to be a little quieter and we'll see what happens. So it just got a lot smaller of what's on the page. Wait till it gets to a close-up again. So here's another run coming up. The long bars are sort of like chords of music in a way, or sort of like a percussion beat. But if you look ahead, all of a sudden there's hardly any dots on the paper. So it gets much quieter and not nearly as intense. It's going to get quieter again. So you're not really reading music, but you're getting an idea of the landmarks. Thunk, thunk, thunk. And here, yeah, I'd probably get lost in the music too, if I wasn't actually truly counting it out. Here comes some craziness in the top. It's gonna start going up and down. It's gonna get more obvious in a minute. That was a little harder to hear. But look at this big up and down coming down. Oops, hang on, we've only got like 30 seconds more. So if you want to watch it on your own, again, there's all the information. This is his username on YouTube. Patrick Mathis, I think is his name, but PAAPAT 1447 is his username on YouTube, and it's Smooth Criminal Michael Jackson. So feel free to go back and look, and yeah, try to do as it goes up and as the dots go up and down the page, try to guess what you think is going to happen as they start to get spread out. So you're not reading music, but that's a similar, without going into all of the music theory and all that kind of stuff. Those are the kind of things you're trying to watch for. So you're watching in your piano vocal score for a big gliss. And then maybe whenever you finally listen to the recording or you get the chance to finally hear the orchestra, you go, oh, that's a harp gliss. You add in the words harp next to yourself to help. Or, oh, it's the violins. Oh, it's the flutes. Those kind of things. But you're looking for those big landmarks. And to me, that's one of the best visuals out there. I'm sorry, it didn't work for all of you on the video. It worked for some of you. And hopefully I'm giving you all of the information so then you can go try this on your own and see what you can do. Let's see, where's my next slide? Oh, I must have done it twice because I was so excited to do it. Okay, so questions about that? Did that make sense of what I was trying to get across? I'm going to assume the answer is yes. Okay, but what about actual music? Again, you can take music theory lessons of how to read time signatures and stuff like that, but how do you set up your score or to be able to actually call off the music? Why is my slide all of a sudden not working on me? Hang on, there we go. So this is from the Nutcracker that I did. And there's a lot of music to the Nutcracker that you've heard in commercials, you've heard at Christmas time, all sorts of stuff. So this is your typical Russian section where they're probably doing Russian jump splits exactly during this music. So it's the dun 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 dun. So I marked, it's still, I know the music, and to me, Nutcracker is still very hard to read. There's a lot of notes on that page. So I blocked out in blue, dun 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 dun, so I can follow along and know where I'm gonna be. Do what works for you, but this is totally, it gives me the visual. There's jump splits right on, those are my two big notes. And if I'm counting and I'm hitting those at the same time, well, then I can follow along to some of the other stuff that may be a little trickier to follow along in the music in between. This is part of what Ellen Marie was talking about, the tree growing. This is the tree growing sequence, at least in our production. So this music is the dun, 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 3, 4, go. So I had to call it for this downbeat. So I wrote in, call it on count 4. This is where it is in the music. It's very hard to tell that that's 4 beats of measure. If you don't read music, it's hard to know that that's only 4 counts of music. This whole measure right here. If you can't see my cursor, some of you can see my cursor, some can't. But you call it on count 4 and you want the reveal to be on the next downbeat. So back when we were talking about how do you put it in for the next stage manager, that's all the things that I'm trying to help both myself and the next stage manager with all of that. Then we got the same kind of music again. Dun, 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 dun. Call it on the and of 4. So again, it goes on the next downbeat for the lights, the clock, and the cabinet. The clock and the cabinet I had in my pre-show notes on calling at the very before you ever say any goes. Anything in italics was only if you needed to cue anybody, like you had a brand new dancer on and somebody needed to cue them. I didn't actually have to say the italicized words most of the time in our production, only if I had a sub in for some reason. And it tells me that the light cue makes the star come on. So again, I wanted that to be on the downbeat. And then I've got more visuals. This time, instead of being music notes that are in blue, that's my visual I'm watching for, is hopefully that is this rat setting the battle clock and cabinet, which correlates to the cue I may have called if needed in the previous measure. This is done in Word, and then I turned it into a PDF using text boxes that were somewhat see-through. I made the opacity I changed from 100% down to, I don't know, I'm going to guess like 25%, but don't quote me on that, so that I could still see my beats through it, but I could also know that's exactly the note I was trying to get it on for calling to music. Another section of music, again, this is no lyrics, but These notes up at the top are a trill from, I believe, flute or piccolo that was happening. I was still calling it on a visual, but it would happen somewhere around the trill, and it was actually on the Rat Queen's entrance. So if I wasn't hearing the trill yet, I didn't have to say a cue. This was the music goes dun, 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 and it does it in the upper register first. That's the next set of blue marks. And then it does it in the bom, 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 bom down here. So these are my notes, because there's a heck of a lot of music going on, but these are my markers for myself. I'm listening for the top line, I'm listening for the bottom line. I'm listening for the bottom line again. What I'm really listening for is these leading notes up towards the bottom. Again, back to that video we were watching where the notes go up. That's the notes going up the register, along with a whole bunch of really high notes in a row. And then my cue is actually on the next page, which I didn't put a sample in of here. Also, like, again, it's, if you don't read music, or even if you do read music, you're like, really, this is 3 counts? Yes, it says 3/4 right up here, but if you've just switched pages, which is what it was, this is the top of Snow, if you know Nutcracker, and you would never guess that that is what is playing, because it's a harp that's not very easy to hear doing all of those notes. You'd think you'd hear all those notes. So I just wrote in the counts for myself. This is how you count this part. Luckily, I didn't have anything until about, the 3rd or 4th stanza system of music. The purple is where to find it in the recording, the number. Yeah, and if you start reading music and stuff, if you can follow along the andante section, that tells you how fast it goes. These are things you want to listen for, especially more in opera. They might say we're going to take it from that section. So you're looking for those kind of words in music as well. This goes more into the opera world. I love to color code my score to help me keep track, especially if it's in Italian or some other language that you can get lost in pretty easily, as well as opera singers do tend to mark their voices and protect them, especially during tech. So you have to be following the music instead of following their voices. But if somebody's talking to you in one ear and you haven't had cues, and all of a sudden you come back, I love to color code my singers. I do stereotypical because it works for my brain, even though we're getting away from gender identities as much, but still in opera, there's usually a lead girl and a lead boy. And so I use pink and blue for those. If there is a very prominent third person, they are usually yellow for me. So this is the opera version of Our Time. You may not have known there's an opera version of Our Town. So the stage manager character is in yellow for me. So, you may have, in a lot of piano vocal scores, there is so one system. So I've got it marked here in orange. But then all of a sudden, a second person starts singing. Now you've got 2 lines of people singing. So the orange bracket on this page is for me to go, all of this is happening at the same time. Sometimes a whole page could just be 12 people singing the same, only 3 measures, and you're going on to the next one. So as much as you can help yourself, this is the system I use. Sometimes I will put a line in between the 2 stanzas too to help my brain really catch, in case my 2 orange highlighters from the 2 stanzas started to touch each other. If you put a line right where I've got the word places instead, because you may know in opera we call places a lot more than in musical theater. This is one version of how you can put cues in your book. So I've color coded yellow for the stage manager, blue is for George. I will say blue highlighters are hard to see through, so I will sometimes put the box around it instead of highlighting so I can still see the word. That's why I did that. Yellow I could still see through. And this particular one, I was using a sticker for my light cue 131 and just said, hey, it goes for the downbeat of that big chord. Let's see. And then if you happen, I was on the Year of the Stage Manager takeover back in January. So this was one of my screenshots from Sminsta 2020. Actually on January 24th, I can see it right there, it says it. And so this was one page of my score for Scalia Ginsburg, the opera. And if you look at it, those pinks are actually little teeny tiny tabs. They're made by Dezo, this particular brand. They're like the Post-its that you can sort of see through the color, but these are really, really tiny. And so you can see exactly which beat I want to call it on, or right after, which this would be right after he cuts off, was what the 30.2 was right after he cut off those words. Act 1, I literally only had lights up for the act and then lights down just before we went into bows of that particular opera. This one, during tech, my designer had skipped from 30 to 32, and the second day of tech, he's like, I think I want to add in a note every time, or a light cue every time the guy talks. So 30 brought it on, 30.2 took it out. 30.4 was just before he sang again, 30.6 took it out, 30.8 brought it back up again, and then 31 was when the other guy started singing as well. You could do this with a highlighter as well if you don't have the fancy little see-through little flagets that I like to use. But I would recommend the erasable highlighters that they make. I know Frixion is one brand that has erasable highlighters. I'm sure there are some others out there. If you do use the erasable things, just don't put your script into a hot car because it's based on heat and it could disappear. But I have to buy these online because they actually come from Japan, these little flags. Let's see, I've lost my ability to see what the next slide is. Oh yeah. So this is where, again, notes for yourself. It's the downbeat, but it's for the singing, not the maestro. So don't be looking at the maestro for the cue because the singers are just gonna take off on their own. So that was a note for myself to help out with that. And here again, my pink and my blue. Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Antonin Scalia are singing here. Timing in the music there. And this particular one, I ended up just writing the blocking straight into the score itself because most of the time it had really big margins and it was so much music that I didn't want to keep turning pages just to get over a blocking script that I wasn't using. Let me see what's next. There we go. All right, what has come up? Because I have lost my chat window in all of this. Adrienne, do we have anything?
We don't have any current questions. Liv Scott did one of those shows in grad school. Which one did you do, Liv? Our Town in grad school.
A lot of people have not done it. I managed in the same calendar year to do both the play and the opera. I did the opera first and I found myself as I was rereading the script, I kept singing it and it took a lot longer to get through the script. Yeah.
So Bill McMillan asks, do you have a legend for what all the colors and marks mean if you get hit by a bus and another SM must call the show?
I do try to do that as much as I can. The colors in opera, I actually, when I do have a blocking page in my score, I actually have that right as the cheat sheet right there on the page. It's one of my little blocks. I list for myself the character's name, the singer's first name, and what color I used for it. And then I have a little checkbox of whether they're in the scene. It depends on the show and the rehearsal process and all sorts of stuff, whether I actually use the checkboxes or not. But sometimes it can be handy for knowing when somebody, do they have time to run to the restroom, and you're flipping through and you're like, oh, there's your check mark. But also that first week of rehearsal, I probably know their character name or their real name, but I may not remember exactly both. And I will have that. I also do a cheat sheet for myself. So like if it's Scalia or Ginsburg, I will have an underline under the S for Scalia, the G for Ginsburg, and the C for commentator. So that is my cue in the blocking as well, what my code was. I will have, in the Nutcracker one, I definitely had a whole page that said, if it's in blue, those are reminders for myself or visuals to watch for, ways to keep track. Yellow are all of the cues themselves, or standbys, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
We also had Melissa Richter ask regarding opera, how do you get involved in opera? Because so many of the job posts say, you know, experience happened already.
Right. They really want you to read music. They really, really want you to read music. And being an ASM in opera is actually a very, very busy job. So there are whole tiers of organizations, just like if you think of in the equity world that there's like Lord A is the highest and B and C and D, the opera world has tiers. And so if you go to the Opera America website, you can see what tier level different companies are, and your level 3 and 4s, rather than your 1s, they're more willing to try people out as an ASM, especially. So if you look around for those kind of things, and if you can read music, put it out there to somebody that you're interested in learning opera, because a lot of times somebody will go, okay, well, we have it, because opera has so many people on staff a lot of times, because you usually need 2 ASMs backstage minimum most of the time. I will caveat everything is subject to whatever is that particular show. I've done operas where I'm the only stage manager too. But often they'll have a spare person, or they'll be able to do an intern or a PA position and stuff like that. So if you put your notice out there that you're interested in doing opera to somebody who might be able to hire you, that can help you out. Opera America has their own job postings as well. There's definitely a stage management group called Stage Management Jobs in Opera that is actually pretty active. Maybe not right now, but yeah. So if you put yourself out there, you'll have to start small probably, or you see if like an opera company is doing a musical. Sometimes those are easier for a non-opera person to try to slip into. I would recommend that you go back and watch our webinar on Opera SM 101, because there are a lot of differences in opera, and so to be able to know some of the differences and to say, hey, I've studied this and I know that this part is different, but I want to learn more, just to make yourself more marketable, and that you don't necessarily know what you're doing, but you've heard these things and you've studied some. What else, Adrienne?
Suggestion for tricky rhythms from Nikki. It may help you if you so suggestion for tricky rhythms. Sometimes word substitutions can be helpful. She reads music, but sometimes you can make yourself crazy trying to count correctly. Mm-hmm. So when calling skimbleshanks and cats, for example, she found it helpful to count on triangle, 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 bar, and bar, and to land the cues in the right spots. So using
words,
tricky, like rhythmic words to help do that instead of counts as well.
And certainly for dance breaks of like, My Fair Lady, most of the dance breaks are actually just new orchestrations of the part they've already sung. So go ahead and write those words into yourself, because I could have danced all night. I could have, that's the music that's going on in the background. So, it's the third time they sing that phrase is when you're getting ready to call the cue too. So you don't have to stare at every piece and you don't have to count it out. You can just sing along to yourself too. I absolutely do that all the time too. I think that's it. That's what I have. And look at that. It's like my time, 2:58. So what, anybody else have suggestions or questions? You do you, whatever works for you to be able to read the music. There's usually an orchestra read and or a sitz probe, which is the first time the singers or actors get with the musicians. So use that to find those extra little times of, oh, that's the flute playing that kind of stuff.
Marcus asks, what's your experience calling to a track versus calling to live music?
So that Nutcracker that I did, we actually would switch on and off. Some were tracked and some were to a conductor. And boy, did we have some tempo changes. So I refrained from putting those samples in because it was so confusing, but I had cues that I would call different places depending on whether we were doing tracked or orchestra. Orchestra can be great at times because, again, you get that conductor camera, at least I did. And so you can be watching and know exactly when he's gonna go or not. But if it's tracked, sometimes I'm the one calling the track. So all of a sudden I have new words to spit out, or can I do a track and my normal stuff because it's normally right after the track or right before it. It can be interesting trying to match that up. If you are calling to track though, you do get the consistency that it's never going to be a slower tempo. So you can always call, unless the visual has really changed, you can always call it on the and, you can always call it on the 8. Even if it's rolling through, how long that roll through is going to be to the next track. That was also one of my biggest issues when we would switch between track and orchestra, because I could watch him do the downbeat and I had to remember that this particular pause feels like forever, and I couldn't see the track running. So I had to just tell myself it's sort of a 4 count. It's sort of an 8 count. Whatever, it was never an 8 count, but sometimes it'd be like a weird 6 count from the way I was counting. So track is easier to practice with, certainly. If you can get the track yourself, you can start nailing those cues. Yeah, it can be good and bad, whether it's track versus orchestra for you. Because if you're calling the track, then you know how long you're going to wait on the applause. It's all on you. But sometimes you're like hurrying to spit out a cue, and then they're deciding to hold it forever before they do the next downbeat. Or sometimes you're in the middle of spitting it out and they go. And so you have to say go.
Gabby asks, do you always ask the LD for the count for cues?
I really try to. I try to listen really hard during programming. And especially if I don't understand what a cue is doing, or if it seems to come up slower, because especially during tech, they made it a 3 count. Well, it's really a 5 count move of the actor. So then you can have the back and forth with the lighting designer of, do you want me to call it later, or are you going to extend the cue? Because you're working together, and they've only had the chance to see it a couple of times, where you probably have been in rehearsal. But if you're picking up a show, I love to have the count in there, because a 0 count means it's a button cue or that kind of thing. And it changes how you're going to call a cue, even versus a 1 count is a big difference in our world of how it's going to land. And if it's a 50-second cue, okay, you told me to call it on this word. If I'm off by a word or two, that one's not going to really matter. But also you can have a 5 count cue, but it all of a sudden, with LEDs don't necessarily fade nicely. They may pop on count 3. So if you know it's a 5 count and you start figuring out, you're like, okay, so really I have to think of it as a 3 count because of the way it pops. And you can ask, if you have time, have the board op just run some cues with you in between, so you can watch it as literally you're next to them, you hear when they click the button, and you watch what happens, and you can adjust your timing. But I am a big fan of knowing what the counts are, and also the difference in, there's an up versus a down time, an up fade, you know, how long new lights come up versus the old lights that were there come down. So it'll be like a 4/3, you'll hear them say over headset as they're programming. And I love to know all of that information. It can be a lot during tech to listen to multiple conversations, because I know that in some colleges, they don't have people listen to all of the channels because it's too much, but that's where I'm getting so much of my information, is from that lighting channel.
I'll back that up. And Nikki adds that her regular board op has gotten in the habit of putting a light monitor at her station because he got tired of answering how long each cue is. And yep, I would agree. I asked for the same thing. It also helps me know if something's complete, especially if it's a blackout or a fade up or one of those long, 50, 60, 2-minute cues, those kind of things. Is something complete? Am I clear to move to the next thing without putting a burden on the operator who might be doing something else, or,
You can also see the auto follows, how they happen better. Some people call it a cue stack monitor, is another term for that, because when I saw it, light monitor, I had to think exactly what, there's different ways. Like, I don't need to see the one with all the instruments changing and all that. I just need the cue stack that says it's lights 12, it's a 4 up, it's a 3 down, and it probably has a focus right. Because sometimes you don't get a chance during tech also to find out exactly what the light cue does, but if it's written right there in their stack, focus brings up stage right. You're like, oh, that's why I'm calling that one there. Great.
Ruth Kramer calls it the cue list, and she asks for it every show as much as she can. Robert has asked, how common is it that you have it in front of you? I would say about 50% of the time for me personally, depending on the theaters that I'm working at. If there's a theater that I'm at for multiple shows, they get a little better about maybe being able to run it eventually, and then I have it going forward from there. Usually I do not have it during tech, it's during performance. All of the monitors are otherwise assigned during tech. So I don't have that luxury of looking at it.
And sometimes you're in the same booth. So sometimes you're not you can just look off the light board up yourself. I had that, my Christmas show, we got them to get me a monitor because I was like, I need to know. And also I kept having rotating board ops, so I had at least 4 different board ops during my run. So I was like, I need to see if it went when I called it. Yeah.
And Ruth has a comment to share here.
Sure.
Hi, since you're in the question and answer module, I signed on late. I'm sorry. I don't know what you talked about in the beginning of this. The one thing I'd like to add to all this, when calling to music, don't waste your rehearsal time. I've had stage managers ask me, well, what do I do during music rehearsals for this musical? That's exactly when you learn the music. If they're learning the music, you learn the music. Don't use it to do paperwork. Don't use it to do anything else. Use it to learn the music along with the cast. Count the number of beats to the button at the end of each number. When they're choreographing, make sure you know on which bar, measure, or count the group changes position or starts a new movement as defined by your choreographer. And the more you do this, the more you're going to know where the cues are going to be ahead of time. Please do not wait until tech rehearsal to learn the music.
Right.
You have to have all that down before you get to technical rehearsal. Now, obviously, there will be moments that you haven't focused on as much as others, and you will be surprised by a cue or two that might come in. But if you're smart, and the more you do this, the more you will know before you even get to tech where the cues are supposed to go.
Mhm.
And usually a lighting designer will put them there. Do not waste a second of rehearsal time when it comes to music, when you're expected to call to music. Thank you very much.
I see a lot of nodding heads. I see agreed written in the chat marks. I would say there are times where I have sent an ASM to deal with music. It's like, find out who's singing which parts for me, because that's really all I just need to know who's woman one, who's whatever, because I'm going to hear it enough in rehearsal. But those first music read-throughs, if somebody in stage management, it may not have to be you yourself, but assign somebody to be definitely taking notes for everybody else, especially as they start dividing up the little one-line solos, that if they haven't already been divided up. So you're not later going, who is that singing? And there's 30 people on stage and you're trying to figure out which one it is. Definitely look for all of those things. Like we mentioned earlier, also, what do they, even the conductor may start calling it let's go back to the floaty riff part. We talked about things that names that the choreographer uses for the music. Write down whatever the conductor calls a certain section too, or if some actor comes up with a section and they all laugh, write that into your stuff so we all know exactly what page you're going back for. You're also listening very much this first couple for where they're making cuts in the music. In opera, you'll usually get a set of a cut list before you start, and you need to mark that out in your script. It's where they're literally not playing pieces of the music. Or are we taking all of the repeats? Are we taking the optional ending? Are we taking the optional high notes? Listen for all of those kind of things. And yeah, by the time you get to tech, you're gonna have to, especially once you've done a couple musicals under your belt, you're gonna know that, is there a cue here? I bet there's a cue here. And the designer starts to give it to you and you're like, yep, ready. I know exactly where you want that. Or within a beat or two, depending on if it's a 5 count or a 3 count, all that kind of stuff. And that's what, then you can use tech judiciously. And then you don't even, if you don't call it right, if you've done enough musicals, by that point, you can be like, yep, I'll call that beat earlier. And they're like, yep, great. Or they go, no, I'm actually going to extend it by a beat. You're like, great, okay. All those kind of notes. Yeah, the sitz probe is the name of the rehearsal. If it's literally just focusing on the music, the first time the singers usually are with the orchestra. If they choose to move around, Sitzprobe is a German word for sitting rehearsal. Wandelprobe is from all of my experience in history, what I've looked up, Wandelprobe is a made-up musical word. It wasn't a German word until someone put it into music. That is for wandling around while they're rehearsing. In opera, we will just usually pick one set. We won't change all of the sets for them, but at least gives them an idea of how music's going to bounce off the set, and can they still see the conductor if they move over to stage right, that kind of stuff. So that's a Wandelprobe. And all of those, yes, they can be a good time to also multitask and do paperwork if you are pretty sure you definitely know the music, or the ASMs don't have any cues during that section per se. It's still a good rehearsal to listen to and know what's going on. Yeah, I love sitz probes and bundle probes, because unless you're just checking down who's going to be up for singing, but if they're all sitting there, you don't have to track people and make sure they're ready for their next entrance. It's all on them. So I love sitz probe rehearsals usually. Anything else? All right, friends, this is a very fun discussion, and thank you for everybody who joined in as well. We have, I think next up, today is Thursday. Saturday, we are doing some open forum times. It's listed on Facebook and the website. It's just going to be, we're going to start doing a couple of these in the next couple of weeks that we'll just have 2 stage managers available to answer any questions about stage management, whatever people feel free to talk about that particular day, what's pressing on their minds. Probably about 45 minutes, half hour, 45 minutes is what we're thinking, not too long, not on any one topic, kind of whatever comes up. They'll probably have some things prepped if nobody has any questions. This Saturday is going to be Hope Rose Kelly and Claudia Lynch. I just am in the process. Tuesday, we are going to, I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe it's 4:30 Central, so do the math on all the other time periods. We are just announcing that Tuesday is going to be a public one, but is Excel for stage managers. So all the tips and tricks to work on Excel for your run sheets and all of the goodies to help you make your Excel paperwork a little bit more interesting. So I will be posting that stuff on Facebook and on the website very soon. I just started creating the Zoom link for that. And we have a couple other ideas for in the future too. If anybody has an idea of something they would like to help talk about that you have expertise in, we're always welcome to ideas. And we're going to try to do a few more of these in the next couple weeks, just because we tend to have a little bit more free time right now. And yeah, and then assuming that we can get the recordings working all right, these will be available. I will say that Monday night's Ghost Stories one, that was so much fun, we are having issues getting the recording because Zoom has gotten overwhelmed this week. So this one we are attempting to record on our own as well as not just Trust the Cloud. But the idea is that all the webinars will be available in the video galleries. So that Opera SM 101 that we talked about a lot, that's over in the video galleries of the Stage Managers Association members only. Once you log in to the website, stagemanagers.org. And if you have any ideas that you want, drop us a line on Facebook, drop me a line. You can also write to Adrienne at secretary, is it secretary or secretaries at stagemanagers.org, Adrienne?
I believe it's secretary. Now you're making me question it. Now
All
I need
right.
to go back into my own emails. That's kind of amusing.
Yeah, but certainly you can find me on Facebook. I bet. Write a comment. There's a couple threads in our members only Facebook group. There's some threads going there with ideas. So somebody had suggested the Excel one. We had thought about it back and forth, and I got one of my friends who's a guru on tricks that I don't know in Excel, and we were brainstorming some stuff. So if you have things you definitely want to ask about for Excel, pivot tables is on the list. The macros or whatever you call it to make sheets talk to each other, that's definitely on the list. Some of those kind of things. And if you have your own tips for Excel, come ready with those too. So anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Adrienne, you have anything else?
It is in fact singular, secretary at stagemanagers.org.
Great.
And you can email also that email address if you're interested in being part of a forum panel, and we'll tuck people together based on availability and interest, and trying to give good cross sections of folks in each gathering.
And I will link to that same YouTube that we were trying to watch together. I will put that in the group as well. Plus, you'll have the information when this video is available again. Hopefully, it works. Anyway, thanks for helping me try something new on the webinar. And we'll see you again next time, folks. Thank you.
Thanks all. Great to have you.